would say, go write it down, and when you get to heaven, you can ask yourself. Okay, but I don't know where that notebook went, actually. But today, I'm asking you, what is your question? Would you come boldly before the throne of God and ask your question as Job did? Or would you work your way around the question as the disciples did in the Mark text? There is something very powerful in having the right question. There are direct questions, loaded questions, questions asked to gain knowledge, and questions asked to elicit controversy or stir up trouble. There are simple questions, complex questions, open-ended questions, opinion questions, and impossible questions. There are a number of alternatives to asking questions. Instead, we could internalize and be quiet. We could become angry and hostile. We could stay ignorant and refuse to learn. We could take out our anxiety on colleagues at work or loved ones at home. We could curse God and live an angry and get-even kind of life. But in all this, we hurt ourselves and others, and most likely make no change to the situation or the circumstance. Negative emotions of fear, anger, and despair are powerful, and they have a way of dumping generous amounts of adrenaline and other behavior-altering fluids directly into the bloodstream. They cause high blood pressure, heart trouble, anxiety, exhaustion, and depression. Think of it this way. God will forgive you your sins, but your body through your endocrine system, not so much. Now, last week you read a portion of Job's questions, and you read about how he wanted to sit down with God and have kind of like a court appearance to resolve the issues he had with God. To reiterate, Job had lost his wealth, his health, his family, and his self-respect. Job reacted to all righteously at first, for as long as he could. But then after being worn down, he did come boldly before God, challenging God with his questions. Job argues, questions, and bargains with God. The bitter pill of suffering took a long time to do its work on Job. He suffered in a guilt-laden, miserable, sorry for himself state of being for a long time. At first, Job bore the calamities with amazing, faithful statements, like the one we are so familiar with. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And as he said to his wife, shall we receive good at the hand of the Lord, and shall we not receive evil? But as the misery continued over the months, Job wavered in his confidence in God's goodness and that God was for him. In defending himself against the words of his three friends, Job began to insist on his own righteousness at the expense of God's justice. For example, in chapters 13, Job says, how many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. Job wanted someone to come out and tell him what his sins were. In other words, why should I deserve this? He can only think that God was ignoring his faithfulness and treating him like an enemy. He did reach the point in chapter 19 where he confessed that even after death he would see God as his Redeemer. But for now, Job felt he was being treated unjustly by God. The God he had served and devoted his life to. Does that sound familiar? Do you know anyone that has felt that way when suffering hits and life gets so hard? And so Job complains to God in chapters 23 and 24. Oh, that I knew where I judgment kept by the Almighty? And why do those who know him never see his days? Job wanted to know why he couldn't come before the throne of God and ask the questions. Right? But do you see what he's asking here? He's asking for God to hold a court case. But Job would be the one asking the questions. He would present his case, and God would respond to him. I think this is where Job crossed the line. I don't know if you agree. Seems a little bold, right? Was Job asking the right question? Notice how the length of time that he suffers turns his questions around. He no longer wished to be held accountable to the standards that he had based his life on. Now, he just wants to die and be done with the suffering. This is a human reaction to suffering. Over time, we break down and our spirit is no longer refreshed. Hope is hard to maintain. And giving up seems like it might be the only answer. When there seems to be no end to the suffering, we're convinced it's too much to bear. This is where Job found himself. But we also know that Job's questions eventually got him in trouble, right? So God answers Job, not with a court date, not with an explanation, but with a long list of questions for Job to ponder, for Job to consider. God puts Job in his place through a lengthy discourse that humbles Job in his humility, and yet through that humbling process, through that humbling experience, the balance is restored in the relationship between God and Job. If you look in your Bible, you'll see how long God's discourse to Job is. God's answers, and by that I mean list of questions, to Job begins at chapter 38 and continues all the way to chapter 42. 4 chapters, 129 verses of God asking questions of Job. And by the time we reach chapter 42, Job is sufficiently put in his place and humbled. And the book ends with God chastising Job's friends for their shallow faith and their lack of understanding. And in good narrative storytelling, we read of Job being restored twofold, in health, wealth, and with a new family. The story of Job is a tough one and brings up some difficult topics for us as people of faith. Yet it's a great encouragement for us to keep life and its troubles in perspective. We know sometimes our choices dictate what happens to us, but sometimes there are circumstances that are beyond our control. When we are suffering through hard times, it's difficult to have the wisdom to recognize the parts of life that are beyond our control. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. Have you ever heard that? Oh yes, we have. We ask why. We ask, how many storms must I go through until God says enough is enough? Right? So what are we to do as we wallow in our suffering? How are we to ask the right questions? Well, perhaps I could suggest that we try reformulating some of our questions so that they become the right questions when we're tempted to ask the wrong questions. When you're tempted to ask, where is God and what have I done to deserve this? Maybe we can teach ourselves to speak out in faith and say, God, I know you're there. How are you helping me to grow in faith and improve my coping skills to get through the suffering? What wisdom or truth can I discern from this experience? Now I want to say, our other questions of doubt and anger do not magically go away. But these questions can help us change our focus to outside of our suffering as we seek out God and ask the Holy Spirit reveal to us the wisdom of a difficult truth that might be hidden there. And sometimes, as in Job's situation, there will be no answers given, simply more questions to ponder. But that's okay. As we change our attitude from negative to positive, and our focus appropriately directed towards God as opposed to directed at our suffering, our faith has a chance to grow. We have the opportunity to add quality to our life while building our faith and improving life coping skills. And that may not happen at the time of suffering. That growth and opportunity may happen later on when you reflect back and process your suffering. We have a chance to hold on to our faith and not lose hope. That's the hard part of discipleship, isn't it? Learning how to ask the right questions is hard. Now, in our gospel reading, I want you to remember that in Job we're talking all about questions, right? And in our gospel reading, the disciples wanted to ask Jesus for a favor. They wanted Jesus to say yes to the favor before they told him what it was. Do you know people that do that? I do that. Right? It's a common question. Hey, can you do me a favor? Have you ever said that to someone? And what's the answer you want? Yes. Right? Of course. Right? But the disciples asked the wrong question. Even after all this time with Jesus, their focus was still on an earthly kingdom. And they were busy maneuvering for places of prominence in the earthly kingdom. And as we, many years later, ponder and reflect upon this experience, we see that this question reveals that the disciples had failed to grasp Jesus' teaching on humility. Right? They were vying for places of position. As disciples of Jesus, we are called to continue to advance our faith and strive to be Christ-like in our living. Suffering is a part of life. No person is exempt from suffering. We persevere by learning coping skills to live like Jesus. And how can we help others to spread God's love when we struggle so desperately within our own life's troubles? Well, that, my friends, is a good question, isn't it? Did you know that Jesus prayed for us, asking God to protect us while we were in the world? He prayed for his disciples first. In John 17, we read Jesus' words as he's praying to the Father before his crucifixion. It says, I will remain in the world no longer, but they still are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. And then he goes on to pray for all of us as believers. Jesus prays for us to persevere in the world and to be one with him and the Father. Did you hear the answer to our suffering? We must remain as one. One with the Father, one with the Son, one with the Holy Spirit, one with each other in faith, believing. We are protected, encouraged, supported, and empowered through the blessed name of Jesus. And it's through his name we will persevere in this life and through each of our sufferings. We may never receive the answers that we seek, even though we want to know why. We continue and we believe and we are confident that God is good and God is love. And most of all, God loves you no matter how you handle the struggle and the suffering that comes before you. God will not stop loving you through all of it. This week on Facebook, I saw a saying that made me laugh. find it again to share it exactly with you. It said, if you want God to open and close doors, try letting go of the handle. Isn't that awesome? Right? Try letting go of the handle. Isn't that the truth? As we struggle to get through difficult suffering on our own, God is there, ready, willing, and able to help us get through it if we just turn to God and ask the right question. Ask for help. Ask for guidance. Ask for wisdom. The story of Job may or may not help us in times of extreme trouble. It's a great book with rich analogy of good versus evil and good advice versus bad advice. A long discourse from God with regards to creation and the role of mankind. I'll sum it up for you. Bottom line, God is God, we are not. Okay? Job is also a story of restoration and healing, where Job and God are reconciled and life goes on after the suffering. This is a huge lesson for us to remember. This gives us a sort of hang in there position in life that provides hope for a reconciling future. Everyone has a purpose in life beyond one's immediate interests and gratification, though many times our purposes go undiscovered. Many people devote their entire lives to the pursuit of living life with great ease and pleasure, avoiding suffering at all costs. But few understand that wisdom comes from the lessons learned through suffering. Let us go forth as disciples of